Hello, and welcome back to the Postscript, a podcast about films where the discourse ended with an ellipsis rather than a period. I'm Chris Hall.
I'm Sebastian.
I'm Mateo.
And on this podcast, we will be reassessing films of recent memory where the discourse was left unsettled. We will try to provide more definitive takes on films that generated buzz upon release, but their reputations have since become murky. Movies that make you ask, where are they now? Last week, we discussed Birdman from 2014, where we determined that the movie is kind of polarizing by nature. And we settled the discourse by saying that by design, the movie will always have people feeling mixed. And we promised that wasn't a cop-out answer. If you listen, you will totally understand. This week, we will be discussing another film from 2014, but one of a much different breed. And that is Gareth Edwards' Godzilla.
I want to talk to somebody in charge. You are not fooling anybody when you say that what happened was a natural disaster. You're lying. It was not an earthquake. It wasn't a typhoon. Because what's really happening is that you're hiding something out there. And it is going to send us back to the Stone Age.
This film follows a Navy bomb expert, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, as he attempts to reunite with his family while caught in the crossfire of an ancient rivalry between Godzilla and two parasitic kaiju. I mean, turn me up. I mean, like, what more do you want? I'm going to be honest. So as far as blockbusters go, especially like monster blockbusters, the movie was pretty well received by critics, although it only has a 3.0 on Letterboxd, which is worth noting. Maybe we'll circle back to that. And the movie made $529 million, which is strong, right? And for reference, its sequel, Godzilla, King of the Monsters, made $389 million. And then Godzilla vs. Kong made $470 million, which a little asterisk there, because that was like one of the first like post-COVID releases. So that's, it probably would have made more than that.
That was like a success. That was a success for sure during the time.
Like Godzilla vs. Kong walked so Tom Cruise could run in the post-COVID, like Who Saved Movies era, right?
Yeah.
And it's also worth mentioning that Kong Skull Island made $567 million. And that's kind of where I want to start this discussion. Like the Godzilla IP has evolved quite a bit since this specific Godzilla movie. And I would say the main reason we wanted to revisit Godzilla 2014 is that its legacy and reputation is largely smothered and kind of lumped in with its sequels or the movies that came after that are now known as the Monsterverse, right? It's just kind of buried underneath what the universe has grown into. But from what we remember, the movie wasn't really concerned, or Godzilla 2014, that is, wasn't really concerned with like a cinematic universe, or even setting up sequels in the slightest. Like it had other things on its mind and other goals than just like, who should we have Godzilla fight next?
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that like the Godzilla universe up to this point obviously did have crossovers and like other monsters coming in, but the star of the show, generally speaking, was always Godzilla. Like you always put Godzilla in the title, and this was the first time I think like this new universe where it's the Monsterverse and Godzilla is a star, but not the star.
Right.
Which makes it such a great stomping ground for us because we know this film wasn't trying to create a universe. It was more trying to tell, a coherent story that people found, moving and engaging and has our boy Bryan Cranston in it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we'll get back to the cast is kind of crazy for this movie, but we'll get back to that. But like you said, the kind of Marvelification of Godzilla happened after this movie. In terms of the discourse surrounding the movie in the moment, there was this kind of like meme. I mean, for some people, it wasn't a meme, but this like meme critique of there being not enough Godzilla in a movie called Godzilla. But then there was also simultaneously criticisms of the movie abandoning the human conflict in favor of Godzilla, like in its last leg, which is a really interesting dichotomy. Like it was of these two criticisms existing. So that being said, I want to throw it to you guys. What memories do you have of this film from 2014? Mateo, I know you've never seen this film, right? But maybe you still have some memories of like what people were talking about, or maybe what your fellow middle schoolers were maybe saying about it back in the day.
Yeah. What I really remember more than anything was the excitement about getting Bryan Cranston like in theaters, because I mean he was really at the height of this extremely, critically and popularly loved run with Breaking Bad, like one of the best TV performances of all time, and people were so excited to see him on the big screen. My big memory was, kind of like hearing about that controversy, that excitement. Like you guys said, some of the frustration with there's not enough Godzilla, and again, feeling that maybe some of the human characters came in a little bit underbaked. But it's such an interesting movie to me because I do think it's fascinating that the studios kind of saw maybe this sort of mixed reception, and Lucasfilm gave him the keys to direct the first Star Wars movie spinoff.
As Chris and I have both seen this film, I think he and I both very much understand, just having seen the movie, being like why they gave him the keys to Rogue One. On a sense of scale, it translates perfectly, and that's almost exactly what they were going for with Rogue One. I'm very curious in the backstory and the behind the scenes of this film, whether or not the entire film was kind of his baby, like if he kind of manifested this interpretation of Godzilla in his own think tank, or was it just kind of like a committee where like this is like, a new take on Godzilla that we were really excited about, and we want someone who can visually interpret it for us, but we already know what the groundwork is. So I am curious, going into my rewatch, how much of Gareth's fingerprints are going to be over this film.
Yeah, do you have any memories of seeing it back in 2014?
Absolutely. This is around the time of Edge of Tomorrow, Captain America, Winter Soldier. Like I remember the trailers playing, for Godzilla. And I mean, I had no interest in Godzilla before this year, which is why like those trailers hit so hard. They were, I mean, they convinced me that I had to see this movie. I didn't even like scary movies, and the trailers like almost looked like a horror film, but the visuals that were on display and the really scary music that just keeps building up, and it leads to an eventual Godzilla scream at the very end to reveal the title card. I was like, I have to see this movie. It looks incredible. I think trailers have a massive place in our pop culture that we really get under discussed. And like just like that, I vividly remember this is one of the trailers that convinced me to watch a film that I had no idea I would even want to watch beforehand, which I thought was really cool. And then after seeing it, I was in love with it. Probably 2014. So 15-year-old me would have given it a 5 out of 5 if I had a letterbox back then. I remember afterwards, like going to school. I was 15, so I was in high school, and like going to like homeroom, and people just being like, "Yo, like the Godzilla, like pretty like Midzilla kind of like feelings," and I was so bummed out by that discourse, because I had enjoyed it so thoroughly that I was scared to talk about it with anyone else. And so like the resurgence of people talking about how much they enjoyed it when I got to college was a breath of fresh air, to say the least.
Yeah, there are totally people who went into this movie, or maybe go into all movies like this, who are like, I'm just here to see these big Jansons fight. Like I'm just here for the kaiju action scenes. And it's clear Gareth was trying to do something else with this movie, something different. And I think what will become an interesting talking point for us is that we've seen criticisms of there being maybe not enough Godzilla, but then also that maybe the humans were underbaked as well. So it's like, after we watch it, we will probably discuss, like, did the movie not really do service to either of those, or was it actually a pretty sublime balance? And maybe seeing the vision is a lot more rewarding than just being like, give me my action scenes. In one of the reviews I read, from a really positive one, it was from David Ehrlich in IndieWire. He said he was addressing some of the criticisms of the like, oh, what happened to the humans? He read it as so much more intentional. And he was like, oh, as Godzilla becomes more prominent in the film, the humans like rightfully should become less important, because like our conflict does become less important when you have a 400-foot tall thing stomping around like, and the world is at stake. He was like, no, like, he's like, I think it slides on the scales appropriately. So seeing where all of us kind of fall on that, I'm very curious to see. So yeah. Personally, I remember having like, I don't know why. I mean, it was a long time ago. I remember having like little to no interest in seeing this movie. I think I just wrote it off as some like big, dumb, loud action movie. Maybe I just didn't see the trailer that Seb saw.
I was gonna say, yeah, you might need to rewatch.
I may have not seen that trailer, but I did end up seeing it. I think, maybe a friend dragged me to it. And I remember not only liking it so much more than I expected, but liking it so much that I was almost like holding my cards close to my chest because of how much I liked it. Like, because I was expecting such a big, dumb movie. And I was like, that was like, I think that was like good. Like, that was like actually like a good movie. I was like, am I allowed to think this about this movie? I mean, again, I was only 14, so my takes don't really extend far beyond that. But
sure.
But I want to talk about Gareth Edwards now, kind of in more detail. Who's the director of this film, and is another large reason of why we wanted to talk about this movie. And this is one of these things that, like, I knew this, but seeing it with my own eyes to confirm still blew my mind a little bit. Gareth Edwards has only made 3 movies. And his fourth, The Creator, starring John David Washington, comes out this week. And a quick detour, like, I don't know how good this movie actually is. Obviously, none of us have seen it yet, but I would like to encourage everybody to go see it. Like, and I think in so many ways, it represents, like, how blockbusters should be made. I think it's like a force for good. I mean, it's an original story. It looks like it cost $300 million, but it only cost $80 million. It's shot on location as much as it could. It didn't use volume tech. It wasn't relying on green screen. It has John David Washington, who post-Tenet could be leading every action movie. Shot by Greg Fraser, who just won a Best Cinematography for Dune a couple of years ago. We're excited. We are a pro creator pod. Yeah.
we are praying that this is not, the next Tomorrowland.
No, don't curse it like that.
I'm sorry. I'll knock on wood. I'm knocking on wood.
It's like we all know, that like Utopia meme. It's like society if the creator makes $500 million. Like, that's like, if this movie's a success, a positive butterfly effect. But Edwards' first feature film came in 2010 with a movie called Monsters, which, I mean, just based off the title, you might be able to guess why he was earmarked to make a Godzilla movie. Made a movie called Monsters. Right. But I just want to say, that movie's awesome. It's about a photojournalist who has to escort his boss's daughter back to the United States through the infected zone in Mexico, where these large extraterrestrials that landed on Earth like a few years beforehand are now residing. Like, it's a really cool take on like just UFOs and stuff. It's like, because usually in movies, it's like when aliens invade, it's like, oh, like it's the end of the world now. But in this one, it's like they're just kind of here now.
Very timely, for what we're going through right now.
Yeah. And in that movie, it's just like, just don't really bother them. Like, and hopefully they won't bother us. The movie was shot on a micro budget of $500,000, but apparently they came in way under that. And frankly, you would never guess it. Like, the movie doesn't look cheap. And Edwards did almost everything on this movie. Like, he directed it, he wrote it, he was the cinematographer, he was the camera operator, he was also the production designer and did the VFX for it. It's like on his laptop. Like,
insane.
Wow.
And again, you wouldn't guess it. It's the type of movie that makes you want to make a movie. It's very, very cool. And then Edwards followed up this movie 4 years later with Godzilla, where he went from a $500,000 budget to wielding a $160 million budget. It's crazy. It's crazy. And then 2 years later, he makes Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, which was hugely successful. Although the extent of his authorship over that movie is sometimes called into question, considering the reportedly extensive reshoots done by Tony Gilroy on it. Regardless, he does have a pretty strong track record so far. There's one buzzword that is often associated with him and kind of thrown out to describe his works, and even Seb used it when talking about him just briefly earlier, and that is scale. Which, being a director that is good at scale, like what being good at scale looks like, can kind of be a tricky thing to define exactly. But it is, I would say, it's being able to convey the perspectives and proximities and even physical size of your characters in relation to their environments in the spectacle they are surrounded by. Like, for example, like an example of bad scale would be like, for those who saw the most recent Ant-Man movie, Ant-Man has the ability to grow to like the size of a skyscraper, and there were moments in the most recent one where like he was in his large form, but based off the way they were shooting him in his environment, like you might not have been like even able to tell that he was supposed to be large. Like you might have thought he was normal height. So that's bad scale. And I'm sure we'll have plenty of examples of Gareth doing scale really, really well in this movie in the post game. But like in like Rogue One, good scale was like it's like the soldiers charging the beaches where the AT-ATs were, and like you really like see their perspective, or what it looked like from someone on the ground when like the Death Star entered the atmosphere, you know. So these skills are bound to shine in a movie like Godzilla, where you have a character that is 400 feet tall, stomping around Earth cities, you know. And so like good scale in a movie like this would be the director making you feel small like the characters do. That's what I'm most excited for to see in this rewatch and to kind of keep an eye out for. But that being said, is there anything you guys want to add on about Edwards in general or scale, or maybe just what you're looking forward to most in this rewatch?
I do have something to say about Gareth Edwards.
Okay.
And I don't want to like set the stakes too high, but I feel like, not to like inflate the importance of our podcast, but I feel like the opinion that we come away with on Godzilla is like going to be very defining of like our general opinion, and hopefully our listeners' general opinion about Gareth Edwards as a filmmaker in general. Because you have Monsters, which in the interest of like complete honesty, I have not seen, but is a pretty small budget movie, and like definitely a movie where sometimes on small budget movies, it's hard to like really judge a director on like one movie. And then you have Godzilla, which is on this podcast, kind of has a murky reputation. A lot of people loved it, a lot of people were kind of mixed on it, and since then has kind of like faded away. And then Rogue One, which is a movie that a lot of people like, but is mired in these reshoots and these changes, and it's hard to really tell who did what on that movie, because Tony Gilroy and Gareth Edwards are both like gentlemen and respect each other and aren't going to like air out all this dirty laundry. So it really is down to Godzilla and the creator, which is coming out, to kind of define like Gareth Edwards' reputation as a filmmaker, because his filmography is so small. And so like in a lot of ways, just like Godzilla, the stakes couldn't be higher.
I love that. No, you're right. I do think post the creator, we will have a much clearer read probably of his tendencies as a filmmaker, and maybe what the rest of his career might hold. But Seb, what are you thinking?
I mean, there's only two directors that come to my mind when it comes to scale that do it as effectively as I've really seen. I think it's Gareth and it's Denis Villeneuve. So I think those two are really kind of at the top of scale filmmaking. Obviously, we don't want to like overemphasize like, oh, scale. That's like only what's important about this film. Obviously, there's a lot more to making a good movie. But I think that it only adds to having a directing personality in a positive light for him. I don't think it's like this double-edged sword where it's like he's a scale director, so that means he can only do like one thing. I think they mostly mention scale as like, no, this is just something that he like excels at, and that's all it has to be.
It's his greatest strength. Yeah.
Right. But when you mentioned Monsters, and then all of those like credits that he had, everything that he was involved in, it told me how much he cares and how much passion he has, clearly, for the filmmaking process. So I'm going to go in with the idea that this guy, like, he really tried, he tried to put his best foot forward to make this movie as good as it possibly could be. And that's what excites me about, delving back in, because it has been a very long time since I've seen it, because some of these movies, when there's controversy or it's just mixed opinions, sometimes you automatically question the guy at the helm or the woman at the helm. And I don't always feel like it's fair as like the starting point for blame, if there is to be blame. But this time, I think this very much is a Gareth project. So I will be watching him almost the closest out of anybody.
A director's movie, for sure.
Yeah.
And from just a visual standpoint, broadly speaking, And we've talked a little on this podcast about how bad a lot of blockbusters look nowadays, especially with all the cutting corners happening with like the new volume digital screen tech and just the over reliance on artificial environments. But I know this movie, not just because the movie came out before volume tech, but because of, like you said, like the sheer level of care Gareth seems to pour into his movies and just his level of craft and skill in general. I mean, like we said, he was the cinematographer on his first movie. And I think he also likes to operate the camera himself a lot. I just know this movie is going to look really, really good. And it's going to feel like a breath of fresh air seeing a blockbuster like this in 2023. Any last remarks on Godzilla before we dive in?
He also, you guys talked about scale. I think Gareth also gets called like gritty and like documentary-esque and
that's
realistic.
That's fair
all the time.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think Godzilla is such a cool opportunity to explore that. So I want to see how that aspect comes to life in the movie.
I love that. That's a good take. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember several scenes where it's exactly what you're talking about. And I won't mention any specifics, but like you're looking for the right stuff is what I'll say for this film.
Let's go. Again, he likes to put you in the trenches for sure with the characters.
Yeah. And you mentioned the volume briefly, and this is kind of the last closing thought, but I am curious just technology wise, if it's going to look dated in any way. I do remember lighting being a huge point of discussion as well, beyond just like screen time of monsters. Lighting was something that was interesting. Some people thought, it added to the atmosphere, and some people were like, what's going on?
For those who couldn't see, Seb just put his hands over his eyes and just shook around.
What's going on?
Great shouts by all. And then one last note that I forgot to mention, to circle back on, crazy cast. Aaron Taylor Johnson in the lead role, Elizabeth Olsen, second build, then with Bryan Cranston, Sally Hawkins, David Strathairn, who plays our boy Noah Vosa in the Bourne movies. Love that guy. It's a banger if he shows up. Ken Watanabe, who again is just always love seeing that guy on the screen. Super fun cast. Excited to see all of them.
French art film favorite Juliette Binoche.
Okay, yeah,
what is she doing there?
I wasn't sure if that would resonate with listeners, but no, yeah, that's crazy. Why is she in this Godzilla movie? I'm super excited, and it seems like you guys are too. So excited to dive in, and I'm just ready to just be stomped on by Godzilla. Yeah.
We believe in Godzilla. I was gonna mention that before we go in.
Godzilla, of course. I'm ready to just for my entire floor, just my entire floor to hear that Godzilla roar. I'm just gonna crank it. I'm gonna open all my doors and windows, let all of Sherman Oaks, California hear it.
Seriously, I wonder if was that scream originally created for this film, or was that kind of was there an original scream of Godzilla that they used into this? I have no idea.
There's probably a 15-minute behind the scenes of how we made the roar. there is 100%.
Yeah.
But yeah, alrighty. Thank you guys for listening this far. Hopefully you rewatch it too with us, and we will see you on the other side.
In 1954, we awakened something.
Well, there's nuclear tests in the Pacific. Not tests.
They were trying to kill it.
You have no idea what's coming.
The arrogance of man is thinking nature is in our control. And not the other way around.
And we're back. Godzilla has saved the city. And after taking a fat nap in the middle of San Francisco, he has re-entered the oceans. I'm just gonna come out and say I think I would die for Godzilla. Just like any other homie, he has a couple flaws, but he's definitely a slime. That being said, so I usually throw it to you guys first with these kind of post rewatch general thoughts, but we more so than Birdman, we are operating with a kind of full spectrum of takes post Godzilla, with a lot of feelings and emotions to sift through right now. So we're gonna start kind of hottest to coldest. I will kick us off as it seems that I am the most fond of this movie post rewatch. We'll throw it to Mateo, and he'll give his we'll say colder thoughts, and then Seb seems to be kind of in the middle ground take wise, and so that's kind of how we'll move through just these opening thoughts. So I'll kick us off. I just want to say that in a time where there's so much gluttony in movie making nowadays, and big studios just doing everything they can and everything they can think of just to please the audience and just nostalgia bait to high heavens with previously existing characters, I think the restraint this movie shows was just water in the desert for me. Like I was really, really impressed by that, and how much this movie understands that less can be so much more, and which is a testament to the directing of this movie, and which I know we're going to talk about that a lot. But I just want to say that I was unaware of how, and I mean this as both as an analysis and as a compliment, because I think it earns the comparison, but from like the spectacle down to the conversational scenes, I was surprised by how Spielbergian this movie was and how successfully I think it channeled some of those sensibilities. So that's where I'm at so far. But Mateo, be the yin to my yang right now. What do you think?
Okay, so I'm definitely not as hot on Godzilla 2014 as Chris is, but I do want to give some context. So I don't have that much experience with the Godzilla franchise. After we finished recording the pregame, I went back and I watched, which I had never seen, the original Godzilla. And something that really, and I don't want to talk about that movie too much on this podcast, but something that really stuck with me about how special 1954 Godzilla is how much time it spends with the human characters and how much of the movie is just about people reacting to Godzilla. So when I critique Godzilla 2014, I'm not coming at it from a place of, oh, there's not enough monsters, like I don't care about these people. Actually, my thoughts are really more kind of the opposite. So I really like how the movie handles like this like conspiracy cover-up with what happened with the Mudos, which are like the flying creatures, the flying and the non-flying creature that are like Godzilla's primary enemies in the film. I like how it handles that, especially in the first act, because you're experiencing this giant story through the eyes of Bryan Cranston and then Aaron Taylor Johnson later on. I think where the movie really starts to just kind of lose it for me is after they escape. I think the movie just jumps from location to location, and it doesn't, I didn't feel like I had enough time to really feel the impact of the destruction that was happening. It ends up feeling weightless in a way that the 1954 movie doesn't. Like in that 1954 movie, even with the cheaper effects, with the smaller budget, the destruction that is happening to Japan is like it's so immediate and intimate. And obviously part of that has to do with like this like post-war like trauma that happened from the nuclear bombings. And you know, it's hard to expect Gareth Edwards to channel that, but I don't think he doesn't really like hit those highs as much as I would have liked to. But I don't want to give him too much fault, because I think it's ultimately just down to how breakneck fast this script is that really kind of brought the movie down for me. But I want to give it to Seb now, because I want Seb to balance us out here.
Yeah, I'll be the little circle that's in the middle of the yin yang. So basically, my experience with this film, I have always remembered it very fondly. And on going into rewatch, I was excited to kind of revisit those feelings that I had from watching the movie. I still enjoyed it. I still had a good time watching it. There were a lot of scenes that I found to be really well done, and I still think this is a movie that was made by, you know, a director and not a committee. I think there was a vision behind it. There were decisions being made, and not just, oh, we have one version of this scene and another version of this scene, let's just choose what the options that our VFX guys made for us. So I do think that there is a coherent story being told. I agree with Mateo in the sense that there is a moment about halfway through the film where the film starts to jump a lot, and it does become a little weightless. There's like, you'll see TV screens in the back almost trying to give you exposition of like how much destruction is happening. And it's hard to really connect with that, because, you know, you really can't tell the scale sometimes beyond just these really quick shots of perspective destruction. You'll see like someone in a casino get wrecked, or you'll see someone in a building kind of briefly encounter some kind of destruction going on. I wish, and we will talk, I'm sure this will be the next part that we talk about. Brian, to me, was a perfect choice for this movie. And it's almost a tragedy, and it's an insane choice to kill him off that early. Because to me, he could have carried this film into a different stratosphere for me if he stayed with it, if he was in the whole thing. And obviously that they knew that they were taking a big swing by doing what they did by killing him off early. I think it was the wrong decision, in my opinion. I think that the film could have benefited from his presence throughout, and the balance between him and Aaron Taylor Johnson could have actually really grounded the film a bit more and made it not feel weightless. But overall, I still think there is a coherence to it. You still feel like these characters, the army characters and Aaron Taylor Johnson, are going on a succinct journey. There is stuff that's propelling it forward. It's not just new thing happens, we react, new things happen to react. It's I have to get to my family, and these things are happening along the way. But in general, there is still that driving force that feels like it's going throughout the entire script.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, well said by you both. And yeah, I wanna dive into Cranston now, because I think he will kind of serve as a launching pad into our conversation between for just the Godzilla versus human balance and kind of criticisms this movie faced. So Cranston, like hopefully you all have seen the movie by now. Cranston does not live past the first act, right? Okay, and he, like Seb was saying, he really does have to carry so much in this movie. Like it is up to him to essentially communicate the stakes, exposition dump, and also provide an emotional center for this movie. And I do think it's amazing. I think you guys will agree that, especially at this point in his career, he could have acted like he was so above this movie. And like, and frankly, like to say he gave 110% is insufficient. Like he gave this movie everything he had, and it's so amazing to see.
Yeah,
it is so.
I mean, he thought he showed up on set for Breaking Bad.
Yeah,
that's the amount of work that he put into it.
I was watching with some friends, and one of them goes like, "Yo, like rent was due for Bryan Cranston," which is the funniest thing ever, considering this was the peak of his acting career. Like this was apex mountain. He had never had more juice, and he was still, again, just like balls to the walls in this movie. But he wasn't overdoing it too. Like But one thing Seb was saying, I think we'll talk about, is that you were saying that maybe it would have been a better film if they kept him alive. And I have so many thoughts about that. At first, I was thinking, like, is it fair to ask if he should have stayed alive? Because again, sometimes it can be a little fraught talking about what a movie should have been instead of just assessing what it is. But I do think it is a worthy discussion of just, was it a mistake to kill him off? I totally understand what you're saying of just like, oh, maybe we lost this emotional core when we lost Cranston. But then I was like, I mean, and this might sound silly, like, is there a role where having Cranston almost distracts from the main goal of the movie as it goes on? Because the movie very much so is trying to grow and grow and grow in scale. And does keeping him around almost take away from like how the movie is intentionally trying to make it so much like less about the humans and the humility and lack of egocentrism in the scale of this film.
I think that the decision to kill him off, it wasn't just random, or to like, oh, we have to create stakes, like we have to, like, let's kill the main character.
We can't afford Brian. It wasn't that.
Yeah, it wasn't that at all. I think it was very much centered around what you were just talking about. That they needed to expand into like bigger scale stuff, and Brian's role was, you almost say he already did what he needed to do for the plot. I just respectfully disagree with that idea, because I think Brian's investment in the entire story of Godzilla and his personal attachment to what happened to him in the past, and can I just say, shout out to that scene
at the beginning in Japan. I mean, he was
Amazing.
unbelievable. I mean, the hallway scene, I was like almost welling up watching
No,
him.
that is
Like,
to extract that much emotion that quickly into
Yeah.
a movie, and that is such a gut-wrenching set piece. Yeah, I'm glad you
Yeah.
highlighted that.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that
Yeah.
scene.
Yeah. And so there's those moments, and I think that he could have given another one of those scenes, or maybe even two more in the rest of the film, because Aaron, while he's great, there is kind of almost a monotone
Mhm.
feeling to him. That he's like, I'm a soldier. I gotta, stay steady. I gotta make sure that I get my job done and protect these people. And that's obviously very, good person. I like to follow a good person in a monster
Mhm.
movie. There's layers to Bryan Cranston's character that make him a little bit more interesting. He could have had debates with the doctors or the army people while everything's going on, that I feel like could have added a little bit more subtext to the film, because they
Mhm.
try and do some things like they present the watch for like the Hiroshima thing, but it's like glazed over very quickly. And I
Sure.
think that like stuff like that, to me, if you add Brian in, could have been better. And it starts jumping around, and I think Brian would have added kind of that grounded layer where it's like, listen, you're doing the mission. I'm not capable of that, but I'm going to stay back. I'm going to kind of create the emotional core and context of the stakes. And if he was there for that, I feel like he could have provided a lot more than just the exposition and kind of the setup at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, to avoid yeah, like getting too much in the counterfactual, I think the problem, like if I wanted to ground the argument specifically in the movie and not what the movie could have been, because I think what Seb is saying is really kind of hitting the nail on the head. Like the movie just lacks a character who can be in the room, kind of like yelling at these people sometimes. Like
Yes.
I think like Ken Watanabe is like, his character is like too restrained. Like
I agree.
maybe if they had given that character a little more like passion, a little more like
Mhm.
I don't know, like unhinged energy.
A
I think
couple less scenes where he's just staring off into the distance.
Yeah,
It was
looking
Yeah.
concerned. It's like, all right, Ken, look a little more anxious in this scene.
Yeah.
yeah, like just somebody to be a little unhinged in those moments, like
Yeah.
Bryan Cranston is so brilliantly in that beginning.
Yeah.
Is maybe kind of what we're pointing to. But man, that beginning is so good. I want to
Yeah.
say I also just love that father-son dynamic while they're exploring like
Yeah.
the old home.
Oh, dude, that was
And you find-
arguably my
You
favorite
find the
scene.
picture.
That was
Yes.
amazing.
And it honestly, like the visual design, it looks, I wrote this down, it looks like a video game, but good.
Like a
It's
Last
got
of
an-
Us set piece.
It's giving Last of Us.
Exactly.
That's literally what my friend said. Yeah.
I mean, just spectacular visual and narrative just coming together there.
Yeah, totally. I love the way it's able to meld through Bryan Cranston, kind of like I said, like the expositional and the emotional, like the way those are kind of intertwined in his character in the beginning. Like that shot when he looks up and it pans back and it's like the happy birthday dad sign. It's just like, like it's a really like emotionally cogent beginning. And I do like, broadly speaking, how the movie starts. The scales are as small as possible. It starts the movie again on as personal of a note as possible, like with the hallway scene and exploring their own home with the son. And then its decision to increasingly grow is something we'll explore more. And that I totally understand what you guys are saying of like, the movie maybe would have benefited from just a stronger and maybe more complex kind of character to latch onto as the viewer and to kind of guide us through, because once Bryan Cranston exits the movie, again, Aaron Taylor Johnson takes the center frame, and I'm not even saying this as a knock against the movie. He's just a less interesting character as Bryan Cranston, because he is,
Right.
because I think more than anything, he is just supposed to serve as a proxy for the viewer. And he is, and something we'll talk about a little bit is that I sometimes people confuse thin writing for simple writing. And I think he's just a simple character. And I think the simpleness of him is very intentional. And he's just a good guy who's trying his best. And like his dad says, like, doesn't want anything to do with this, but is kind of forced into this conflict. And I think Aaron Taylor Johnson, I think he's very serviceable. I think he's easy to root for. you know, and I think you are kind of dialed in to just what his emotions and wavelength are, and it's a very simple goal, just I want to get back to my family. And I do think this is in service of, and something I think Edwards is really good at, of making you, the viewer, feel as much as a character as anyone else in the movie. Like it feels like it feels like you are truly like in the fight with them in the trenches. And when the movie's at its best, like I said, like it makes you feel so insignificant compared to what is happening. So that being said, I think we can just tackle just the kind of broad criticism of this movie, of just the balance between monsters and humans in this movie, right? And so as the scale grows, you guys, showed some concern of just maybe losing touch a little bit with it, and things maybe starting to move a little too fast, feeling a little weightless. But just where are you guys now post rewatch about that criticism of not enough Godzilla in a Godzilla movie, or it abandoning human conflict?
Yeah, I want to say the one thing that I remember hearing about people really critiquing about this movie when it came out was not enough Godzilla. This is a Godzilla movie. I don't care about the people. The people are boring. Get them out of the movie and just give me more Godzilla. And not that every movie has to be the same, but that is not a criticism that is like grounded in the reality of the Godzilla franchise. Like of what I've seen, like the best Godzilla movies are about how the people respond to what is functionally a natural disaster in a giant, reptilian body.
Good take.
And so, I'm like fundamentally on the other side.
Yeah.
Maybe the problem is not enough Godzilla, but too much of the Mutos.
Yeah.
Like they're just kind of like lumbering around and causing a lot of destruction, but like it doesn't feel really special for kind of what I was saying before, the rushed pacing, and especially for a first movie and a reboot, like kind of having a narrower focus, I would have appreciated. Or honestly, a longer runtime, just to give us and people always want movies to be shorter, but a longer runtime to give us just a more time to kind of process what is happening and let us process it through the humans, I would have really appreciated.
Yeah. And I think that the Muto thing, I definitely agree with. I literally put in my notes that like this is feeling like the Muto movie more than the Godzilla movie right now. And I think the movie could have benefited from like Godzilla being the one that they studied in that first set piece rather than a Muto. Like all of a sudden they just kind of reveal in some exposition dump like, oh yeah, Godzilla's been around for like several decades in the 1950s, and we've just been watching him this whole time, and now he's finally coming out to go fight these things. And to me, that felt a little anticlimactic, that they're just like, yeah, he's around, we're just waiting for him to do something. And taking from that to his actual reveal in the Hawaii set piece was breathtaking in my opinion.
That is
you have
magic.
The explosions of the planes, and there's like a slow pan are going, and this is something that the movie does really well, and with the camera, is that it follows destruction, or it follows action, and it uses action to lead to the next subject in the shot. And this is one of them where the Muto destroys a plane, it's causing a cascade of fireballs, and then at the end of the window you see the stomp come in at the end. So it's like this really cool perspective shot, and it's the beginning of the face off. And obviously there's the slow rise pan up to real the full body, and he does the shriek, and it's bone chilling.
That is a truly amazing moment, like that. And that is and a little, and that's where I think some of my like Spielberg comparisons were coming from, like you said, of like in one continuous shot having there be shifting subjects within it, instead of just cutting around. And later I do want to touch back on just how almost like what the shot was for a movie like this looks like, and how intentional some of these frames are. And I wrote in my notes, it's like moments like when the camera's following all these people, and then you see the flares get shot up, and then you follow the flares, and it leads to the leg of Godzilla. I'm like, this is movie magic. And like in the way the not enough Godzilla thing grinds my gears so much, because you don't have moments like this without the restraint to hold back the Godzilla card, because the way the movie builds up the mythos of Godzilla, because the things that are not seen are so much more, are so much grander in your mind sometimes than in reality. And the way it just builds and builds up until that final reveal, and the way it just, holistically speaking, the way the movie treats Godzilla and his presence as such a novelty, it just makes his presence so much more rewarding, and it makes the payoffs hit so much harder. Like every time all of Godzilla is in a frame, it felt special. And I know that's something these movies like ultimately lost, you know, when it became just, when he became such of a main character. I just love the braveness of some of those choices, like you said, because like you know, the camera pans up, he roars, it's like a full goosebump moment. And I'm just like, I am in the presence of something so beyond words right now. And the way it cuts away, and it doesn't show you the fight, and you just see through the kids' point of view on the television of the fight. And you may bump on that, but like, I know it's okay to maybe bump on that choice, but like, you know, the people on the opposite, on the not enough Godzilla spectrum are like, we're probably furious at that. And like, bro, like, show me the fight. And I'm like, and I think that moment is kind of a microcosm of where this movie may have lost some folks, and maybe where some folks commended the film for its restraint. But yeah.
I absolutely agree that there is that feeling of like the cutaway, and literally the fight's already over. It's like the next day or something, and they're like, oh yeah, like they're showing a shot of him get back in the water, really not a glimpse of the fight at all. And I actually did feel frustrated in my rewatch, being like, that was kind of weird. Like we have like this huge like triumphant moment of the roar, and like, oh, fight's done. Never, like, you don't get to see anything. Like, and so that felt a little weird, because I had gotten like my emotions up to watch that, and I would have preferred at least like a taste of the fight. Like, you can have like
that's fair.
Like a few swings,
a morsel,
and then cut
maybe.
away. Yeah, exactly. Like I don't need to see a whole fight, but yeah. Anyway, but like it's not a huge bump. I do think like I said before, these are decisions being made. It's not cowardice. It's just more the direction they went.
Like, that is a brave choice. To cut away from that fight is a brave choice.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything that I will praise this movie for, it is that I think that it handles the kind of mythical, imposing, instantly iconic image of Godzilla so well by not spoiling it, by just putting it on the screen over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's like it's not revealing your ace too soon.
Yeah, exactly.
There's so much reverence and discretion in this movie that I really love. Yeah, just,
you know, because
Godzilla.
I feel like there are like two directions that you can really go with a Godzilla movie, and that's like you know, you can go like with like the sort of more classic direction, which is that what Gareth Edwards like went for, and is something that is kind of hard to do really well. So I appreciate that he tried. Or you can go the other way, which is like Godzilla is in every frame, and it's just complete bonkers insanity, right? And those movies can be a lot of fun too, but like trying to strike that balance, and trying to like go towards the other side of it in a modern, especially like a modern blockbuster, like where people like modern action movies have become so like people are waiting for the action scene to come in a way that like really wasn't much of a thing in older action movies. Like people just want constant nonstop action to try to give it a more restrained touch. Not that I think he really succeeded, but to try is commendable, and I appreciate it.
Right. Love that. Yeah. And yeah, and ultimately it's the choice to, you know, adjust the sliders and the balance between the humans and the monsters as the film goes on. It is where, I mean, how you respond to that is kind of where you will fall in the movie in a lot of ways. Because I mean, because like when the third act starts, like the third act is initiated by, it's one of our favorite lines in the movie, of when Ken Watanabe says, "Let them fight," which is an amazing line. And to me, that read as like literally the movie saying like, this isn't about us anymore. Like this is like the threat and the scale is expanding so much, and it's something so much larger than us. Like our interpersonal conflict is just like not the point anymore. And I like how, even as a viewer, how small that makes you feel. And we can go set piece by set piece if we want, but just one moment in the Halo jump set piece, which I know we'll return to, it's when the clouds part, and then you see like this POV shot of like Godzilla in the middle of a fight with another monster. Like it felt like it felt like we were like interrupting something more important. Like it felt like the adults were talking and the humans were just like, "Oh, we're
Yeah.
sorry." Like, and I just
Oops.
love the humility of that in that
Yeah.
finale. It's such
That is a fantastic visual.
yes.
Yeah. I mean,
it is such again. It's one of the many moments of amazing perspective in this movie, and that's something. And for me, that's a moment where I'm like, where would someone like Cranston even fit in this finale? You know, it's like maybe like maybe even if it's
That's a
thing.
laptop wallpaper moment.
No, I mean, I'm pretty sure I did have that as my laptop wallpaper
No,
for a little
truly,
while.
like that is. But that is a moment where I'm like, you know, I do kind of understand the decision of like we just like it's literally just clear the court, like call an ISO for Godzilla. It's like we don't have room for a Cranston in this finale. But I totally see the flip side of that, and I do think it was very worthwhile of us to explore that. And
I want to make like one last little point about like the script.
Okay.
Just like the script takes a back seat, I'd say, and it rightfully so. I think that like the film becomes much more visually prominent in the second half, even if that also includes jumping around. The visuals, for the most part, are pretty breathtaking. You know, some moments of some dated CGI and VFX, but to me, it wasn't very detracting, especially Chris and I being the nighttime viewers. But it's really, I mean, I think the script specifically takes a step back at the let them fight moment. Like he has the line he says before that, which is I think like the Tony Gilroy line of like, you know, it's men's arrogance to like think that they have, you know, a say or control over nature or something among those lines and not the other way around. Like that is such a perfect build up to let them fight. And it's like how can you even argue against that statement? You're like, yeah, like these things are like natural disasters and they have to clash. These are titans that have to clash, and we don't have a say in that, you know, anymore. We tried, and it's out of our hands. I also do appreciate the general who is the, you know, Jesus Christ is Jason Bourne guy. I love him.
David Strather.
David Strather. Noah Vosa. Yeah.
I love that he wasn't like some mustache twirling army general. Like the nuke solution. The nuke solution. It was honestly, when you hear them talk about like it's all we have. That's all, like literally what he says. He's like, listen, I'm open to suggestions, but this is literally all we can do. So it's like, if you could tell me an alternative, and he's just like, well, we could just let them, you know, beat the crap out of each other. And he's just like, yeah, that doesn't seem very safe.
They avoid, like you said, the stubborn general trope. He's like, bro, this is all we got. Yeah, he's like, if there's a better idea, we will use it. This is all we have.
Yeah.
Well, which is great.
Yeah,
and
which to me, I was the breath of fresh air. Absolutely.
Truly. And a note I made while watching the movie, and I didn't mean this against the script or specifically the writing of the dialogue. Now, I was watching and I was like, I think there is a direct correlation between what the current words per minute is in this movie and how much the movie is cooking. Like if you're watching, like no one's really said anything in the few minutes. That means you're either watching something or you're about to see one of the coolest things you've ever seen. Like it is, when the conversation stops and it's just Gareth guiding you through a set piece, it's like the movie is really singing in those moments. But not that I thought I didn't feel like I was muscling through any of the conversations or you know, or any of the writing. It was just serviceable to get you to those amazing set pieces. And I think this can kind of lead us into our conversation just about the directing and put a coin in the jar every time we say it, the scale of the film. And at one point I was wondering, I was like, should I be taking note, like for the pod, you know, should I be taking note every time Edwards does something with perspective and scale, like in a set piece? Like that is really awesome and worth mentioning. But then I realized, I was like, honestly, like I think it would have taken me 5 hours to finish the movie if I tried taking moment of every time I was like, oh, that was a really cool shot, right? I mean, we could do an entire pod of just going scene by scene through these set pieces and just breaking down like what he's doing from a directorial standpoint, and like it's moments like in the like the monorail sequence where Aaron Taylor Johnson is on the train, and and like the Mutos are attacking, where, and it's kind of Dunkirk-esque too, where there's like there will be a single explosion, and then you immediately see that explosion from like multiple different perspectives and like multiple different people. And not only does it add so much to the experience, but it's never disorienting either. Like it's so spatially cogent as well. And I just think that is so well done. And it's all these different perspectives that are so meaningful, and like I said, so additive in these set pieces. And there's so many different ways I could complement them. But I think I really want to talk about, and this is for me a very Spielbergian aspect of it, is just how intentional Gareth Edwards is with his frames. And personally, I especially ever since I started like making movies like myself, I've become just like hyper aware and almost like overly concerned when watching a scene, especially conversational scenes, of like how many shots or how much coverage the director is getting in a scene, and how many different angles he's trying to shoot these people with. Because and for me, like I'll be, especially in these like big studio movies, sometimes you'll be watching a scene and there are just so many different angles like you're cutting between, and there's so much different coverage that seems so unnecessary. And I'm like, unless you're like a Tony Scott and you have like a million cameras going, and like you have 8 different cameras going and choosing between them, or unless you're a David Fincher and you're doing this like, and you're getting all this different coverage for the sake of perfectionism and this kind of like, and maximizing the set you're living in, unless you're one of those, getting so much coverage and so many different angles can just read to me as just like a lack of intention and a lack of vision, and just like, oh, let's just shoot the scene in all these different ways, and we'll kind of put it together in post. And I love how in this movie, like, there's such a considered and appropriate amount of coverage and just in frames. Like it feels like he storyboarded this so much. And like this, in the Spielberg nature of it came through to me, especially in those conversation scenes where instead of just cutting around this room of 8 different people in the conversation at just some like disorienting pace, he'll just like, he'll keep it in one continuous shot and just move between different subjects, or he'll just have like maybe just one setup per person. And that's just something I really appreciate on like a granular level. And then it sings the most and comes to life the most in those big set pieces where he is just like showing you so many different angles and perspectives. I know I keep using that word a lot, but POVs of the action, but not just for the sake of like covering it wholly. Like it's such an additive experience to what you, the viewer, is feeling. Like it's all for the sake of placing you, the viewer, in that environment and making you feel what the characters are feeling. And I think it is so utterly effective, and is ultimately, at the end of the day, all of these things that he's doing, all these choices he's making, makes this movie like truly inspire awe in a way that I think so many blockbusters fail to do. There'll be so many big budget films that try to throw so much at you and try to throw a spectacle at you, but so few of them make me feel like I'm in the presence of spectacle. I feel like this movie did, like I audibly went, "That's so cool," or went, "Whoa," like countless times in this movie. And the people I was watching with, one of them who had never seen it before, they were doing the same thing. And frankly, like, and maybe this is just a long way of me saying, like, I wish I could have watched it in the theater again, because it was just so, like, watching, like, I had a pretty good watching setup on my TV, but even that, it felt like a disservice to what he was accomplishing.
Kind of begs to be seen in the theater.
Truly, 100%. So I know I just kind of monologued, but what are you guys thinking?
Yeah,
the movie was definitely storyboarded. That's like absolutely. A big takeaway. There's one particular shot that I want to call out for surprising me in a nice way. There was a moment when Elizabeth Olsen, who we have not mentioned up until now, is basically standing and she's looking out into like the foggy distance, and she sees this guy coming down on a parachute. For a brief moment, I thought, this was Aaron Taylor Johnson coming in just to like save the day or something. I was like, oh, this is corny as hell. Like I was worried. And then it cuts to a reaction shot of her, and right behind her, a fighter jet just flies into a building behind her.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, that was such a sick reveal, because it's like, wait, where's this guy coming from? And then you realize, oh, it was because his fighter jet was just knocked out of the sky.
And then it cuts to all the jets falling because of the
starting to fall. Those are really great moments of visual storytelling without saying a single word.
You're so right.
And I just wanted to call that out.
No, and you're absolutely right. Again, it's like the way he's introducing like these ideas and these feelings, it is just so effective. And it's like I said, this isn't just coverage for the sake of coverage. It's all like perspectives that add new emotions. And it's all additive for a visceral experience. Mateo, what are you thinking?
Especially in the third act, I think I agree generally with what you guys have said. I think, at least for me, watch this movie if you can in like the darkest room possible. Like, check the lumens, like, because this movie is shot very, very dark.
Yeah.
Like some of the set pieces are so unbelievably dim, and I can see that being a criticism of the cinematography. I think like you like somebody who is acting in bad faith can see that decision and say, oh, they're using that to cover up so they have to do less CGI.
Yeah.
But the one point where I think Edward's direction started to lose me a little bit was the Las Vegas, the Las Vegas
reveal. Yeah.
attack. I don't know, kind of feels like kind of a lost, kind of like a missed opportunity. Like, I don't know why they decided to take that story there, but like the destruction of Las Vegas like feels just kind of like an afterthought, so that he can have like the Roy Orbison, I think it's Roy Orbison needle drop, and like kind of just like play around in this like silly, like colorful environment. But like I don't think he like minds that much out of it. And maybe that is due to the fact that the Mudos are just like less interesting than Godzilla. Like, and like you're just kind of, and the script is just moving so fast that you're just like kind of like chasing after them, like, and you just get to see them lay waste to a place and then move on. And I think in those moments, like maybe just some longer takes and just like some more lingering, like just like lingering a little more, like taking a page from like kind of slower cinema would have been to this movie's strength. But I think apart from that, I think you guys brought up some really great points about especially that finale, like how it's two set pieces. You have the bomb defusal and the and like this giant battle happening at the same time. The editing balance that it takes to bring those together and like make those flow and not roll your eyes and say, oh, we're back at this and then we're back at that again. It's pretty hard to land the plane there. And I think I'd give him probably like a B for that. I think
interesting.
I
think he did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up the editing, because that is something I wanted to talk about. And it's the film was edited by Bob Ducey, who like I'm not like again, I'm not gonna act like I'm someone who just like has just like a whole catalog of editors in my mind to like look out for in the credits. I just know him because he's Rian Johnson's primary editor, and that was one of my biggest praises of the movie was I felt like it was so well edited. And in a micro sense, I thought from set piece to set piece, I thought each set piece just like perfectly snowballed and just grew and grew and grew and always built up into some huge payoff. Even if it was just like a couple minutes, like the buses on the bridge, and just the way he just totally sets the stage, like you were saying, Seb, in a totally visual storytelling sense, like without saying what's happening. I just felt like all these just builds and payoffs from scene to scene were so good, and the way it's cutting between all these different players in these set pieces was so smooth, and especially with how much is jumping around spatially. I always felt totally engaged, because I felt like the movie as a whole was also doing this, like rolling this larger snowball at this like gradually and sometimes exponentially increasing pace. Because and you guys bumped on that a little bit. I was okay with it because I felt like, because again, it's the film starts at a much slower pace as the stakes are much more personal and much smaller. But as the stakes grow, I mean, because like the threat and the scale of this danger does grow at a rapid pace, and I feel like the movie like speeds up in conjunction with that. And I don't know, I felt like it was all in service of communicating the stakes, and also just like helping the movie just move along really, really well. Like it felt light on screen for 2 hours, but I know to you guys I communicated that came through as a little more weightless because these characters are being swept up in this whirlwind. And I thought the overall pace and the exponentially growing nature and rapidly speeding up nature was in a meaningful, effective snowballing effect. But that's just where I lied on it. Yeah.
I was gonna say, what's interesting is that we can kind of compare this to Incredibles 2, where that like these scenes aren't necessarily lacking information. There's just like a lot of scenes. There's a lot of things going on. But for this case, for you, like it works because you said that it's kind of increasing in scale and increasing in the amount of stakes that it's almost
you have to start
covering
up
more things.
Yeah, that's how I felt.
Whereas in Incredibles 2, it's kind of like it all becomes kind of blurred together because like it always feels like high stakes.
Yeah, because the pacing in this movie is on a curve, and the pacing in Incredibles was just this straight line that was always fast, you know. And in this one, I feel like the scenes and set pieces are so much more defined.
I want to shout out a specific moment where the movie didn't have to do this because I feel like a lot of monster movies like to have their moments where like the human character and the monster connect. And there's a very brief moment where Godzilla's knocked down and like the mist clears away and Aaron Taylor Johnson doesn't even realize that he's standing right next to like the body of Godzilla, and he opens his eyes and they have this moment where they connect and nothing's said, but they both kind of get up and go back to their thing. And I'm just like, that was so cool. Like, I mean, yeah, sure, it doesn't add to the plot, but I just like, it was nice to have that.
And it is a true, like,
just looking at each other, just acknowledging
each, making you feel like in the presence of something so much bigger than yourself. And it's an awesome moment. And another scene that I wanted to highlight, again, just a small little moment, like it's when they're in Chinatown and all the soldiers are there. And for like 10 seconds, there's this like really inspired, like almost like musical decision of like the score becomes really minimalistic and it's just these like dissonant piano notes. Like it got kind of like piano chords playing, and then like the lightning flashes, and then you just see Godzilla there as like a piano note cues. And I'm like, I don't know where this came from, but like that was cinema right there. Like that was amazing. It was just like 10 really inspired seconds for me that I just all I wanted to do was just highlight that and say that everyone in the room went, whoa, like that. it was just so cool. That made me feel like this is what movies are about, you know. It's just like you're experiencing something you can't anywhere else. And we already highlighted like the Hawaii sequence and like the planes exploding, moving down, and then boom, and the foot landing. And that's just it's so visceral and it's just so amazing. And we just need to talk about the Halo jump scene. That is a moment that's what I'm talking when I'm like, this is awe-inspiring, and like the almost like the choral, like orchestral voices that are scoring the scene. And the way in this movie, we talked about gravity a little bit, but this movie does do like actual POV shots too, I think really, really well, because again,
they're great. I was a big fan of the limited, but just very solid first person work.
Absolutely. And I mean, I know if you were taking a shot every time I said perspective, you would probably be in the hospital right now, but that is a moment where it's quite literally like doing POV and perspective so effectively. And it has to be brought up, and Seb mentions this in his Letterboxd review, but this is a Halo jump scene, and a few years later came the Mission Impossible Fallout Halo jump scene. And when the Godzilla one started, I was like, am I gonna like, is this gonna fall flat for me because of how, like, because I've seen the Fallout scene and the way they like the way they filmed it for real in Fallout? I didn't feel that way because I feel like this movie had some sauce that the Fallout one doesn't have. Like, I think they're different enough, you know, even if it's as little as the red streaks on their ankles. Like,
inspired choice, by the way. Like,
whoever was like had the red streaks, I hope their 401k is paid for. I hope they're like, I hope they're living large. It's just so beautiful. And that, I think maybe this is the wallpaper shot you were saying, Mateo, but when it goes wide and you just see all the red streaks falling in like this war-torn city, I'm like, that was, maybe this becomes a segment. That was my this is why we play moment.
Yeah,
I was just about to say that is the Postscript certified this is why we play.
If like, the movie only existed for that shot, I'm like, worth it. That is so like, this is why we go to the movies. No, this is why we go to the theater. Like, it's It is true. And then when the clouds part and it's just like, oh,
And
like
the choral
like,
music.
sorry guys. It's
Yeah.
like you see Godzilla in some fight. It's like, we'll come back another time. Like you guys are clearly in the middle of something. But and again, I think that is possible because like we said earlier, with the restraint it shows and how it like showing Godzilla in doses, like when Godzilla first lights up, when Godzilla first breathes fire. That is a like I had seen this movie before, and I was oddly going, "Yo!" Like,
I mean, the kills are incredible.
Well, I was just gonna say, wait, before we get to that, the first reveal of the fire breath, it was awesome because there's this moment where Aaron Taylor Johnson's at face to face with one of the Mutas, and it's about to kill him, and then all of a sudden you hear this noise. And it starts panning up, and you start seeing the slow build of like blue
he's
going up the back of something, and you realize it's him, and it's the reveal of the fire, and that's not a kill; it's just the reveal that he has the fire breath, which it's the best ever look. There's no fire breath in any other Godzilla where that's looked better.
My friend who hadn't seen it before had the same reaction my brother and I did back in 2014 when we saw it. He breathes fire, and we go, "Yo!" Didn't know he could do that. That's awesome. It's so cool. And like it's sometimes like I'm not even gonna try to find like a more sophisticated word. What if it's just really cool? What if it's just awesome? Like
the cool factor will sometimes override. It's like sometimes when there's like, technically there was a penalty on a play in a sport, but sometimes the play was so cool you just gotta give it up. You're gonna let it play.
Truly.
Building on that, like the way that it does those kills, like it is kind of funny that like really like those giant fights at the end of the day when they're like beating the crap out of each other, it kind of is a street fight with miniatures, like and
right,
like just like the like breathing fire like into the thing's mouth, like into its insides, like it's such a like it's like kind of like gross, like
just like
thinking about it, like
rips his head off.
Yeah, like
top 10
it is
movie
like
kill of all time in my opinion.
Wild animals just killing each other, and it made me like those kills are like maybe the best thing about like this franchise, like the Universal Monsterverse kills. Like, I mean, the King Kong one in Godzilla v Kong, like it made me want to Google that one on YouTube, watch that clip, like because like Gareth Edwards did them so well, and that everybody else. Like in every sequel was like, oh, let me write that down. I gotta do one of these.
Write that down.
No, and again, but yeah, those kills are like for me one of the main examples of just like amazing payoffs, but like in a visual and visceral sense. Like those, like not even necessarily story payoffs. Sometimes they're just like within a single set piece payoffs. It just like from a purely visual sense, just like really, it scratched an itch for me. Because again, this movie really does communicate how much we almost ought to revere and be in fear of Godzilla. How this is. I think there's a quote from Gareth Edwards I just have to read out. When he was describing how he wants like Godzilla, the character, to be viewed in this movie, he is quote, "He's the punishment we deserve." I'm like, that. What is a rowdy?
Should put that in the movie.
I was saying, put that in the movie, bro. That is so good. Because again, this movie, as a viewer, it makes you feel helpless. And I love just one shot I love is when on the bridge with all the school buses. And like you can tell this wave is coming, and you just see like the three like back spikes of Godzilla just moving in the water. I'm like, here he comes! Classic. Like this.
Yeah,
like, it's the fact that
here comes a big wave.
Like it's like because someone would see the YouTube link of like all Godzilla scenes and be like, what? It's only 8 minutes, but like it's like that because at least I got excited every time he was on screen, and I think that's so special. And it's just like I appreciated his vision in that sense,
That's fair. Did y'all think the movie kind of ended a little abruptly? I was like, oh, it's over. Like when he just gets back in the water, just cuts to credits. You're like,
okay. My friend just goes, surely the movie isn't over. Immediately cuts to black. Like that was
seriously.
It was hilarious. But for me, and again, maybe I'm just like drinking the Kool-Aid of like what I think his vision was so much. But like it's like he's back with his family, and the moment like Godzilla leaves, it's just like story's over. It's like there's nothing else to be told. It's like it became his story and his conflict, and once he leaves, it's like, what more is there to be? You know?
Yeah.
It's not about us anymore. It's like he's gone, movie's done. That's just how
I think maybe like a modern audience member is like waiting for the sequel setup.
That's like supposed to be tantalizing in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I feel like. Yeah, like where's my MCU post credits? Like,
I mean, I was personally waiting for the full circle with Bryan Cranston. I thought there was going to be another scene with Aaron, like maybe like coming to terms. I mean, I guess he already did technically because he wanted to finish the fight for him. But I thought there was going to be like the last scene in the movie. But to be honest, like it's not necessary, and I still feel like it's fine with where it was. I was surprised by like. Just the shot, I guess it chose to end on, like he's just kind of slowly getting back into the water. It's like, oh, done.
And it's a long shot of the water after he like, kind of slinks in. It just lingers on the water for like a really long time.
That's when I realized I was like, oh, we're about to cut, and then
No.
And maybe it's like just like that. Like Godzilla's in our lives, and then he just departs. Like last online 50 years ago type of thing.
Yeah.
Any final things you guys want to talk about this movie before we wrap up?
I'm thinking if we're trying to, if our point is to, put a period on this discourse and like kind of like give this movie a good like final word. I think for me, this movie is remembered for maybe all the wrong reasons.
I was gonna say that was the opposite of what I said last week for Birdman, where I said remember for the right reasons.
The opposite of
like,
Birdman, yeah, that's fine.
Like I think every like kind of like popular easy thought to have about this movie about why it's good or why it's bad is like basically wrong. I think it is.
How much is that attributed to an opinion? Like how is that more of an opinion, or are we just actually saying like no, it actually like people?
What I mean is just that like the criticism that this movie has received over the years is like all about like the human characters and not enough Godzilla. And like I think we've kind of like discoursed so much about why those criticisms are like kind of just like really off the mark of what this movie is trying to do, and like what makes Godzilla such an interesting like story to tell. And so I think I think this is a movie that if you haven't seen it recently deserves a rewatch for that, because Gareth Edwards deserves the respect to have people actually remember his movie for what it is and not what it isn't. Like, even if you don't like it, I'm glad that I watched it and that I have an opinion about the movie that is actually grounded in what it is and not like, like the hazy memory just in this case feels so incorrect.
That was such a good line, Mateo. I got like almost chills for that. Like, remember for what the movie is, not what it isn't. Oh,
I love that. I was gonna say if I had to, I think my little phrase to sum it up, it might be in terms of what his reputation is in movie culture. I'm just gonna say user error. I understand the movie has flaws. There are things to bump on, but like in terms of like how it's largely viewed, and even somehow people watch it, it feels a little bit like user error in a way. And that's at least the Chris takeaway in that. I was watching the movie and like when I see just like the beaten and just like scarred Godzilla after like saving the world, like walk back into the ocean, I was like, man, we don't deserve Godzilla. But then I was like, I mean, kind of double entendre, because I'm like, in relation to how we have treated this movie, like we don't really deserve it, because it's operating with so much more integrity. And like, I'm not saying this movie like should have been on like end of decade list or something like that. Like, I'm not like, oh, this is actually Mad Max Fury Road. I just think this movie has its lane. It knows exactly what it wants to do and just does it. And you may bump on some of the choices, and like there are some maybe self-imposed limitations on that, but it just operates with so much confidence and is delivering the experience that I think that it exactly wants to deliver. And for that, I think it ought to be commended. And part of me almost doesn't even want to knock it for what it lacks, because it's just it's just trying to be one specific thing for the viewer. And for that, I appreciated it on that level.
That's why I think what Mateo said was perfect. Like, remember for what it is, not for what it didn't have, or what it wasn't. So because there's so many Godzilla movies afterwards that are just like that have all those fights, and he's in like 2 out of 2.5 hours. So it's just like watch those movies if that's what you really care about. Like, I feel like this movie's actually trying to do something a little different.
Well said. You can get your fix elsewhere, you know, and this movie is providing something different. So yeah.
Exactly.
So hey, I feel good about that. And so yeah, go see The Creator this Friday.
Ooh,
Yeah, if you
forward
can.
to it.
I gotta watch The Creator now.
Yeah.
I gotta watch
I was
it.
gonna say, I am
Right.
very excited for that, especially given the reviews. Like,
Yeah, good early first reactions. I'm very, very excited. And next week, we will be revisiting Jordan Peele's Us, which we're very excited about, kicking off a spooky October with Us.
yes, sir.
So thank you all for listening, and we will see you then.
The criticism that this movie has received over the years is like all about like the human characters and not enough Godzilla. I think this is a movie that, if you haven't seen it recently, deserves a rewatch for that, because Gareth Edwards deserves the respect to have people actually remember his movie for what it is and not what it isn't.
When I see just like the beaten and like scarred Godzilla after like saving the world, walk back into the ocean, I was like, man, we don't deserve Godzilla. I was like, I mean, kind of double entendre, because I'm like, in relation to how we have treated this movie, like, we don't really deserve it. Like, I'm not like, oh, this is actually Mad Max Fury Road. I understand the movie has flaws. There are things to bump on, but in terms of what its reputation is, it feels a little bit like user error in a way.